Okay, so now I've got the turbo sitting where it's going to be sitting, and the oil in and out is in the area it's going to be. I can kind of work out where I want to put the return in the sump. Obviously you want them quite up high in here so it's not dragging on the bottom, but you also want to put them so that you can still get to all of the nuts and bolts nice and easy. You could just drill a hole, put it through with rubber O-rings and put a bolt on the back, but the sump's off. It needs a clean, needs some work, so I've always got little bits and pieces of stuff that I've cut up over the years, so I'll literally just cut that off, find where I want it to be, drill a hole, clean it all up and weld that in, and then that's just the return for the oil from the turbo. I also, like on mine, just want to build a little guard that comes up here and across there, and that is so that the water pipes for the oil, for the water oil cooler, run under the sump, are protected from everything and are kept out the way. Then I'll clean it all up and give it a paint. But all in all, this sump, you know, it's just come off a car that wasn't running too long, so you can see the oil's still pretty good. There's not much shit in there, so it shouldn't clean up too bad at all. So I'll get that done and then move on to something else. Right, so I just held the sump up underneath the motor. This mark here is kind of in line with the oil cartridge in the turbo, but if I go back here to where I put mine, you can kind of get it between those two bolts. It's right on a nice big ridge up here, and then that means that you can run the oil return hose from the turbo through the engine mount. So it's, you know, it's quite secure and safe where it is. So that's what I'll do. Right, so we've got to weld the oil return in. I made this little guard that just gets welded on the sump there. There's enough room between there and the cross member for it. There's enough room to pass hoses through. Now, if you're running a front mount oil cooler or no oil cooler at all, you don't need to do this. But because I run a water oil cooler from a Toyota 1G GTE, the hoses need to come off the back there and run somewhere. So I run them straight under the sump, and then they'll come around and go into the water for the turbo and then back into the radiator. So for that reason, I put this little guard on there, so it's just extra protection from road rash, you know, gravel, any of that sort of shit, and they're tucked up out the way nice and neat, so when you're pulling the engine in and out, it makes life easier. So all I'll do is I'll just plug weld that on the front and then just tack it on the back, and it's not going anywhere. Right, so there you are. That's all in place. Like it's only 0.9 steel, but with the folds, the tacks and everything, that's very strong, very secure, and like I say, it will protect the hoses and makes it easier removing the engine, which when you have turbo Pintos, you do quite a bit. The return, if I can, I prefer to weld them on the inside. They are low pressure, so you know, as long as it's sealed, and it's always going to be below the oil level anyway, so I'm not even going to bother cleaning that up. It'll be fine. But all of this, before it goes on the car, we'll get a thorough clean. Clean the sump out, clean the outside, paint it, but the sump itself on the inside has to be spotless. And then before we put that on, we'll put the oil pump in, oil pickup, and then we'll whack the sump on. But first of all, I'll get it all cleaned up, painted. I'll be using some brake cleaner to clean the inside. Pretty good stuff. You can see the shit's already come off so far, so we'll give it a few good coats and then get it as clean as we possibly can. Now, I know that's not spotless, but that is clean. There's no dust, debris, welding splatter or anything else in there. So they always look dirty unless you get a, you know, vapor blasted or whatever, but that's fine. I mean, the engine, there's nothing in there that can go through the engine. The engine's got to have an oil change anyway, so it'll have brake and oil, run for a little while, and then get an oil change. I think mine's had 3 oil changes in 500 k's, so now I just clean up the outside, give it a good paint. I go around and make sure that this lip is straight as well, that these aren't pulled up. If they are, you're not going to get a good seal. So I go around and make sure they're all dead flat, clean it all up, paint it, and then once it's dry we'll whack it on the car. Right, so the sump's all painted and cleaned, dry. Everything's ready to go in, so we've got new gaskets, new crank seal. Everything's been cleaned up and checked. I've heard horror stories with new aftermarket oil pumps, so I always check the factory one that came with it. I believe the cast ones are way better than the aluminium ones, but I haven't had a problem with older ones yet, as long as you check them and they're not worn. As long as everything is clean and checked out, no major wear marks. Like you do get a little bit on the cap every now and then, but they're not too bad. That checks out, that's all fine. We'll put it all together. Like I say, everything's been cleaned, checked. I'll put a little bit of oil through that and spin it around as well, so it's all good to go. Clean these surfaces. Check where you've put your front seal, because that normally sits proud, so you want to get a little razor blade and just cut them off nicely. I will put sealant in those corners. There, and I also will put sealant on the gasket, because I've had shit leak so many times that I can't just trust the gasket anymore. I always like to put a little bit of sealant on it. So first things first, I'll put the oil pump together. Right, I always make sure that that surface is clean. Make sure all of these surfaces are all clean. And most importantly is this. If you haven't put that in, if your oil pump's already in the sump and everything, and you're putting a dizzy in, make sure that's in. If you're deleting the dizzy like I have, make sure that's in. If you're putting the oil pump in after the dizzy's in, make sure that is in. Because the auxiliary pulley turns a cog that turns this, that turns a dizzy, and this goes into the end of the dizzy, and this turns your oil pump. If you don't put this in, you'll have no oil pressure, ever. The engine will still run, it will still turn over, but you have not pumped any oil through that motor. This is probably one of the most important parts of this engine. Goes in there. You can see how much sticks out. and you can see how much is needed on that. There's not much. It's quite a tight fit, but make sure that seat's in there. That's in there nice. Right, so I just like to go around and make sure that all of these are threaded in there and will tighten. Now these are torqued down to like 5 or 7 foot-pounds. They're not much. They're basically what I class as hand tight. But everyone has their own way of doing it, but I like to start in the middle, work forward, and then work backwards. And I just drop everything on the ground. And then I just get it about there, and 1 extra turn. And there you go, you got your oil return there, and your oil from the turbo. Some of you keen-eye viewers will know that cartridge is actually upside down, but that will come down, drain, and then I can run the hose through here and then straight into there, which kind of tucks hoses out the way. You know, it's the way to do it. And the same as the water hoses, when they come through here to go to the turbo, they'll be tucked through there and then fed up to the turbo as well. And then the crank seal I'll tap in when it's off the stand and we're putting the flywheel in. But that's a something. So while the motor's upside down, we might as well put the oil feed for the turbo. So you've got your oil pressure sensor in a Pinto, and then this is all I use. This is a 1/4 MPD to 1/8 adapter. So that's 1/4 MPD, same as that. So that can screw into the block, that can screw into the end of it, and it gives you a 1/8 MPD oil feed to run off to your turbo. And a little brass washer. So that's that. That's screwed into the block. Oil pressure for your factory gauges in there now. And I try and orientate it so that the oil feed is pointing out this way, so I can just run the feed straight up the back of the motor and around to the turbo. That's another one done. Right, so on to one of the next issues. With the ITBs, you've got all of these vacuum ports, right? So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You got 8 vacuum ports. You don't need them all. There's some spare ones at the front, but you can't just run stuff off one. Like you can't just run your vacuum to your fuel pressure sensor off one, because they're individual. They need to be equal. So it's the same as trying to run a map sensor off just one. You can't do it. You need to run them into a common block and then take all your signals from that common block. So all 4 runners need to go into what they call a vacuum manifold, and then all of your sensors like your fuel pressure regulator, boost gauge, map sensor can all then run off that manifold, which is taking vacuum from all 4 ports. So you get one of these. So this is just a vacuum manifold. You can do what you like. You know, you've got ports coming out this side. You can put one on this side, and then you've got 6 individual ports on top. You can block them off if you want, cap them off, but I ended up using all of mine. So you take all 4 runners into this, and then you can take the likes of one off to your fuel pressure sensor, fuel pressure regulator, and one off to your map. I ran my brake booster vacuum off this side, and then on this side on mine I have a Hobbs pressure switch which triggers the water spray for the intercooler. So this is capped off at the moment. It can be mounted. That can be run for the brake booster. All 4 runners go into 4 of these, and then you've got signals to go out to the things you need. and then it just keeps it all balanced. It is something you have to do. It's a pain in the ass. You have vacuum lines everywhere, but the joys of ITBs on the turbo. So I'll just get that mounted. Right, so that's where I decided to do. I just decided to drill out one end to be able to take it on one of these bolts. So everything's facing the way it can go. This one here can come around the back to the brake booster. Those four can come across. And then that one can go out to the fuel pressure regulator and then off to the map sensor. So that's nice and clean in the way. You know, he's got a 50mm blow-off valve to go on there as well. So yeah, slowly coming together, slowly ticking parts off that list. Right, so next issue. Because we're adding a lot more electronics to a car, the factory alternator doesn't keep up with it. So what I put in mind was an alternator off a Ford Falcon, which is an aftermarket one, 12 volt, 100 amp. This is kept up with all of the electronics in my car and keeps the battery charged very, very well. Not badly priced either. The downside is I had to make a bracket for mine to fit on this side because there's no room because there's an electric water pump on mine. So I made a bracket that fit mine all under there, and that kind of allowed me just to position where I want it. I was kind of hoping it wouldn't be too far off of the factory bracket. Turns out it is. I have to find a way of mounting this to this, this to this, and make this an adapter plate that moves that where I need it so that that aligns with the water pump pulley. Fun times. Okay, so what I've ended up doing is getting some of this stainless that I had, machining down a sleeve to fit inside here. I'll tap it all the way in, I'll cut it off that end, then I'll cut this end off to fit that, so that the thickness of this side keeps this captive, you know what I mean? Like it won't have anywhere to move, it'll be in there nice and tight. Then that sleeve fits this threaded rod, and I'll weld one nut on one side and then probably drill and tap the other side of this so it can just be bolted in there and screw into it. See how that works. The joys of having to fucking make everything, right? Cut the rod, weld a nut on the end, drilled out that side of the bracket to this size, and then tapped that side to this side. So now you can just go straight through and tighten up. With that on there. So now I just need to move this forward so that that matches the water pump pulley. So I'm just going to make another bracket. Just like that. So that step down inside there, that's a space between there and there, so that's all one piece. This can't move forwards or backwards anymore, and I left enough thread just in case that thread shits itself. I can put a nut on the back of it. Right, so what you end up with is another bracket, and I drilled and tapped the bracket so that that one will bolt to it. Cleared it off. I still might have to trim the back of it for a bottom radiator hose. Then the alternator bolts on. I just need to make an adjuster that comes out. The belt alignment was obviously the most important part to get right, so you know, you don't want it throwing belts off all the time. So just got to make an adjuster, but that's the alternator on. And I go for these alternators because they're, like I say, 100 amp. They're one wire. You know, you can there's a plug on the side for your dash light to go out for your alternate for your charge, but it's one positive wire, one negative wire. That's it. 100 amp should keep it going nicely. Then I'll be able to clock this around and it should be perfect. But that's kind of the alternator mounted. The adjuster's the easy part. pretty happy with that. So with the alternators, you get to the point where you're spending money, like the likes of these, you know, that's $40 odd. You can find them for $60 up to a couple of $100. You might find them cheaper on AliExpress. All those bolt-on things are up to you. Like the turbo manifold, that's less than $500. The alternator's a few $100, but it's a good alternator. It's brand new. You can probably get away with using something off a Japanese car and just make the mounts and make it fit. But I have this on mine. I'm very, very happy with it. It's brand new, and it definitely holds a charge. So the core engine is a core engine, but all of the things that bolt on and add on, that all depends on how much you want to spend. I bought so many second-hand things or cheaper things and then ended up replacing them with better ones, that this is what we're doing with this motor. We're just biting the bullet and buying the best straight off, so that we know that it lasts, so that if the engine explodes, everything else can go back on and it'll still run. Okay, any questions, please ask. You know, if you want any more in-depth photos or explanation on certain things, please ask. Apart from that, definitely come together.